Week 16 fantasy football was honestly one of the craziest weeks of fantasy all season, and I feel like I say that after every week, but this past week, there's no secret. You can go back to that video. I call myself out all the time. I was wrong on a lot of defenses in preparation for Week 16 fantasy football. I had to do a lot of soul searching over this Christmas holiday to make sure that I'm bringing you guys the best defenses of this week, because now it means more than ever. If you are here in Week 17 fantasy football, first of all, congratulations for making it this far. It's a lot of people's championship weeks, and some of you, maybe it's semifinals right now, and you go to Week 18, which, by the way, we'll be posting Week 18. So I've got Jack Lambert, Steelers legend, sitting over me watching these rankings happen, and I am going through the top 12 defense rankings for Week 17 fantasy football. And I am doing everything I possibly can to give you guys the best chance of winning your fantasy football championship. So please go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. So the Browns defense is at number 1 here, and they're playing the Jets at home on Thursday night. So the Cleveland Browns are, first of all, they're fantastic. Like, they're one of the few defenses that has really been nothing less than pretty solid for the entire fantasy football season. Their defense just averaging under 9 fantasy points per game, which, by the way, heading into Week 17, heading into Week 17, you're going to see that a lot of these defenses aren't even averaging 8 points. That's a really good number. And the reason why, because they've got a stud pass rusher. They've got a great secondary, averaging almost 3 sacks per game and over a pick per game. They're making you score very little points. They don't let that much go. So they're playing the Jets, and I understand the Jets just walked all over the Commanders, obviously, last week. And it's like, okay, maybe their offense is doing something with Trevor Siemian. Yeah, I'm not buying into it personally. The Cleveland Browns on a short week at home versus the New York Jets. Give me the Cleveland Browns defense all day. The 49ers defense is at number 2 here, and they're taking on the Commanders in Washington. So one of the biggest things I got wrong in the week was I had the 49ers defense in the top 12 last week. I said it in that episode. I thought that the 49ers were going to win this game. So not only was I extremely wrong about the outcome of the game, but the 49ers defense got bullied. They got pushed around by the Ravens this past week. So it kind of leaves us wondering what's the direction that this franchise and this defense specifically is heading in. I think that this was just a game where the Ravens just kind of made a statement win to say, we're actually the best team in this league. And the 49ers are not, because their quarterback is not as good as Baltimore's is. But that does that make the 49ers a bad team? Absolutely not. So when they get another chance here against the Commanders, I expect a pissed off San Francisco 49ers team to come in and do very well against Sam Howell and that company, because they just got abused by the New York Jets a week ago. Well, the 49ers are averaging 3 sacks per game, over a pick per game, almost a pick and a half per game. They're averaging still 8.5 fantasy points per game. So the 49ers are still a great defense. They just had a bad week. And that's why I'm taking them, if someone's dropping them, this week against the Commanders. Number 3, I've got the Baltimore Ravens defense. And it's not like, who are they playing, right? Are they playing the Panthers? No. Are they playing the Packers? No. They're playing the Miami Dolphins. I don't think it matters. The Ravens defense just absolutely abused what a lot of us thought, including myself, to be the best football team in the NFL. This Ravens defense is strong, man. And here's the problem. Kyle Hamilton did go down to a knee injury, it looked like, against the 49ers on Christmas night. So that wasn't a good look. And hopefully he can be back. I sure hope so. He's a great player. But the Ravens are just so hot right now. They're steamrolling everybody. And they fully deserve to be in the top 3. Look at the way their defense is performing. 10.4 fantasy points per game. Those are Dallas Cowboys numbers. Except the Cowboys are actually cooling off at the wrong time. The Ravens are heating up. So the Ravens defense against the Dolphins this week, not only do I think they're going to win the game, but I've got them here at number 3. The Broncos defense at number 4. And they're taking on the Chargers. And listen, the Broncos obviously have disappointed the past several weeks, actually, defensively. Obviously, they lost to the Lions, and then they just lost to the Patriots on Christmas Eve. It wasn't good. And it's not a good look for a team that I thought was heading in the right direction. So it's not a good look at all. There's just something about this matchup with the Chargers where it's a divisional matchup, so there's a lot of things that could happen, and the Chargers actually did put up a good fight against the Bills. They're not really playing for anything, though. The Broncos still have an outside shot to get in the playoffs. They're still technically in it, so I do expect a good effort from the Broncos this week. And their defense is still pretty good. They do things that the Chargers don't do well. They're good at stopping the pass. They get after your quarterback still. So I do think that this is a good matchup for the Denver Broncos here, and that's why they're at number 4. And I've got the Jets defense at number 5 taking on the Browns. So first of all, it needs to be addressed. I was extremely wrong on the New York Jets defense. Now you're going to see me discuss this Jets defense and what I got right, what I got wrong, so I'll go more into it. But I just wanted to address it because transparency is important on my channel. I was 100% wrong about the Jets defense, and you were right. Those of you telling me the Jets should be in the top 12, you were right. The Jets do have a great defense. I've never doubted that necessarily. What I doubted was the direction of their team and where their team culture was at inside that locker room. Well, it turns out it was a lot better than I thought. They fought for a win against the Commanders. They let them back in the game and still let them have over 20 points. But they're just such a great playmaking defense that it doesn't matter. So that's what I think about the Browns this week too. I think the Browns are probably going to win this game en route to a playoff clinching berth. But I also do think that when you look at Joe Flacco, he has thrown picks this year. He has not been perfect. So I do think there's opportunities here for the Jets to get some turnovers and have a pretty decent day in fantasy football. Jets defense at number 5. The Houston Texans this week. And they're taking on the Tennessee Titans in Houston. The Texans defense just got throttled, obviously, by the Browns, and Amari Cooper having a legendary game. That's just, you can't get around that. And I'm not a big, advocate for the Texans defense at this point in the season. At one point, I did think they were heading towards the right path. I still do think that to a point. But I have to pump the brakes on that because they're just not there quite yet. Their younger players still need a little bit more time to develop. This is a great game for it. They're taking on the Tennessee Titans, who, yes, did put up a good fight against the Seahawks defense. And I would say the Seahawks defense is arguably better. 2 things, it's a division matchup, anything can happen. And number 2, the Tennessee Titans, they're just not a good offense. That's not a secret to anybody. So the Texans, if they can get 2.5 sacks per game, if they can get an interception in this game, they're going to be in line for a good performance here, regardless of if it's Will Levis or Ryan Tannehill. The Raiders defense at number 7. The Raiders defense at the Indianapolis Colts this week. Did you know that the Raiders defense, as of today, the time of this filming, on Tuesday afternoon, is the number 4 defense in fantasy football? The Raiders defense is legit. Now, here's the problem I have with the Raiders defense. The Raiders defense is boom or bust. They're either over the past month, they're either getting you 20 plus points or they're getting you 0. So it's a boom or bust opportunity here. And against an offense that has scored points for most of the season, I don't particularly love the matchup. But what I will say is this: the Raiders are playing good football right now. Their defense is playing physical, downhill, aggressive football, leading them to almost 3 sacks per game, over a turnover per game, and getting them in the end zone. On the other hand, the Colts are actually on the downhill. They're not playing very well lately. So I don't think that this is some awful matchup. I think the Raiders are in the right direction, and that's why I've got the Raiders at 7, and I've got the Colts at 8 here, because here's the other reality with this one. Yes, the Colts defense, they let up a lot last week. If you play the Colts defense, this is, again, I take responsibility for this because they've been inside my top 12 for most of the season, and they've warranted that. But last week was an embarrassment. They had negative points depending on your format. Well, the good thing about this one is that the Raiders did not complete a single pass in the last 3 quarters against the Chiefs on Christmas Day. How do you do that and win the game? Well, number one, because the Raiders defense was making plays. The Colts defense makes plays too. They just didn't do it last week. So that number dropped from about 9 fantasy points per game right to about 8.8 fantasy points per game. But they're still averaging 3 sacks per game. They're still averaging a turnover per game. So this Colts defense, still playmakers on this defense, and they're taking on an offense that really is not that great. Colts defense at 8. The Seahawks defense at number 9. And they're taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers in Seattle. And it's like, okay, listen. Seattle's defense last week, they ended up okay against the Tennessee Titans. It wasn't the best. It wasn't the worst. The Seattle Seahawks are also playing a team that looked a lot better offensively than I thought they would. But you know what else? The Pittsburgh Steelers offensively, that was like the first time in years since they put up 30 plus points. That was a historic offensive performance over the last like 5 years. So, do I think that's the new norm? No, it's not. Now, Mason Rudolph is the confirmed starter again. Can he do it again? I don't really like his chances in Seattle against the Seahawks, who are 100% looking to secure a playoff spot. And at this point, the Steelers, yes, they're still alive, but I don't think it lasts after this week when the Seattles take that 3 sacks per game to the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive line that has been struggling and get an interception on top of that maybe. So the Seahawks defense at number 9. The Bears defense at number 10. Definitely disappointment last week. The Bears are playing the Falcons, and again, I say this every week, but I said it last week leading up to the game. Look, the Falcons were coming off a bad loss to the Panthers where they scored 9 points. And I said, I could easily see a world where the Falcons have a great offensive performance like they did last week. Because this offense does not like talent. Everybody understands that. They have talent on this offense. The problem is the coaching. And it feels week to week at this point, whereas the Bears actually feel like they're on an upward trajectory. Yes, their defense did not play great against the Cardinals last week. I had 3 points with them. Depending on your format, it was around that area. The Bears defense still looking very good. Getting after the passer, though. Getting interceptions. They're still on an upward trajectory, I would say. And against the Falcons, it's a deep shot to take. It's definitely high upside, but it's also got a pretty low floor. But I'm going to take the opportunity here and say that the Falcons revert back to what they've been doing, which is inconsistency and bad offensive play, depending on the particular week. The Buffalo Bills at number 11 here. And the Buffalo Bills, I mean, they're taking on the Patriots, and like, I wanted to rank them a lot higher. I was obviously really wrong about the Bills defense last week. They were my number 1 defense of the week, and I was hoping that was going to be my worst call of the week. Probably wasn't, but the Bills defense, I need to acknowledge I was wrong about them. I mean, they did fine against the Chargers, but it was not good. The Bills defense was a big disappointment in a big spot, and it very well could happen again against a team that's actually looking better. The Patriots are looking better. They've got more fight in them. They look like they want to play for Belichick. So the Bills defense is sketchy, but with the numbers that they put up, almost 3.5 sacks per game, almost a pick per game, 8.7 fantasy points per game against an offense that's finding their footing a little bit, but they're still not very high upside. And the Bills are fighting for playoffs. I think the Bills will be a good play, but I'm not as confident as I thought I was going to be heading into this week. Rounding out the top 12, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers find themselves in the top 12 versus the New Orleans Saints. Now listen, I just want to put a couple things out there. The Buccaneers defense had a great fantasy performance against the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars are a failing team right now. The Saints have a lot of similarities to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're very offensively turnover prone. Derek Carr basically throwing an interception per game at this point. He's not looked very good. So I think it's a good match to take advantage of, but I want to put this out there as well. The Buccaneers do not have a great defense. They're averaging less than 8 fantasy points per game. And they're not, numbers wise, it doesn't tell the whole story. They're very capable of giving up 30 points. And I think it could happen against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, against the Saints this week. But what I will say is, again, very similar to the Bears and the Raiders, this team's fighting right now. and they look like they actually care to take some momentum into the playoffs, which they're bound to make after they beat the Saints this week. That's why I've got the Buccaneers defense at number 12. And obviously, this only applies for someone playing into week 18. I've got a bonus defense for you, as I do at the end of every single defense video. If you have the roster space to put this defense on your bench in preparation for the next week. And this week, there's been so many changes on defense. It was actually a little bit tougher to pick this one. And it's going to sound totally out of left field. I've got the Patriots defense against the New York Jets at home next week. Listen, the Patriots defense, when they lost Christian Gonzalez and Matt Judon in early October, I thought this defense was going to be horrific for the rest of the season. And for the most part, they've been pretty bad. The past couple of weeks, though, they're holding their opponents to pretty low scoring. And they were in line for a top 3 defense finish in fantasy football last week. So you give me, maybe Zach Wilson comes back. Maybe it's Trevor Siemian again and he starts to show some cracks, which he will. The Patriots defense is not a bad play next week. They could easily find themselves in the top 12. And I do think that if you're playing the waiver wire, the Patriots defense is not a bad play in week 18. So let me know what you think of the rankings in the comments below and what questions you need answered for week 17 fantasy football.